Commander Choi Woo-jin floated in the dark space between two large rocks that had once been part of a planet. The rocks were bigger than cities, and they were perfect for hiding things inside. He wore a special suit that let him work in the cold. Empty space for hours without getting tired. It had been 50 years since humanity disappeared from the galaxy. 50 years of silence and hard work and slow, careful building. Commander Choi Woo-jin had been a young officer when the ships first arrived in the Void Sector. Now he was older and stronger and in charge of making sure humanity could survive. The Void Sector was the perfect place to hide. It was too far from anything important for aliens to want to explore it. There were no planets with good air or water. There were no valuable metals or crystals to mine. There were no trade routes that passed through it. Most aliens thought it was just empty, useless space, but humans were good at making something from nothing. Commander Choi Woo-jin and his teams had carved cities inside the biggest asteroids. They had built farms that grew food without soil. They had made factories that could take broken alien technology and turn it into something better. The hidden asteroid cities were amazing to see. They had lights that made them feel warm and safe. They had parks where children could play and gardens where people could grow flowers. The air was clean and the water was pure. Everything was designed to help humans feel at home, even in the cold darkness of space. Yun Nara worked in the deepest laboratory in the main asteroid city. She was a small woman with quick hands and bright eyes that never seemed to stop moving. She had been studying the plague that nearly killed humanity, and she had found something incredible. The plague was not just a disease. It was a weapon that someone had made to kill humans. Specifically, Dr. Yun Nara had spent years taking it apart piece by piece until she understood how it worked. Once she knew how it worked, she could figure out how to make it work backwards. Instead of killing humans, the plague could be changed to make them stronger. Dr. Yun Nara had tested it on herself first and then on volunteers who wanted to help. The results were amazing. Humans became faster and smarter and able to survive in places that would kill most aliens. The new humans could hold their breath for hours. They could see in the dark. They could think faster than the most advanced computers. They could lift things that were 10 times heavier than before. They could heal from injuries that would cripple other species. Children who were born after the change were even more amazing. They learned to walk and talk much faster than normal human children. They could solve problems that confused adults. They could remember everything they ever saw or heard. Some of them seemed to know things without being taught. Park Dong-hyeon was one of the engineers who designed the new human weapons. He was a tall man with rough hands and a mind that could see how machines worked just by looking at them. He had studied every piece of alien technology that the humans had brought with them. The aliens used energy weapons that shot beams of light or electricity. These weapons were powerful, but they had problems. They took a lot of energy to use. They were slow to recharge. They could be blocked by the right kind of metal or force field. Park Dong-hyeon decided to make weapons that worked differently. Human weapons would shoot pieces of metal very, very fast. The metal would be so fast that it could punch through any armor or shield. The aliens would not be ready for weapons like this. The new human ships were built around these weapons. They were long and sleek and covered in metal that bent light around them, so they were almost invisible. The ships could appear and disappear like ghosts. They could sneak up on enemies without being seen inside the ships. Everything was designed for the new, stronger humans. The controls were faster and more sensitive. The computers could think as fast as the human crew. The weapons could fire faster than any alien ship could dodge. The hidden shipyards were the most impressive thing humans had built in the Void Sector. They were huge metal structures that floated in space like mechanical spiders. Each shipyard could build dozens of ships at the same time using robots that never got tired or made mistakes. The shipyards used materials that came from the asteroids and broken pieces of old alien ships. The humans had learned to recycle everything. They could take a destroyed alien cruiser and turn it into parts for 3 new human ships that were better than the original captain. Lin Jae-sung was one of the humans who had been changed to look like aliens. He had special surgery that made his skin blue and gave him extra arms so he could pretend to be a Zephyrian. He had spent years learning their language and customs. Captain Lin Jae-sung went to the Zephyrian military schools and learned how they trained their officers. He discovered that the Zephyrians had become lazy and predictable. They always did the same things in the same order. They never tried new ideas or changed their plans. The Zephyrian officers were proud and thought they were better than everyone else. They would not listen to advice from lower-ranking soldiers. They made decisions based on what looked good rather than what worked best. They cared more about ceremonies and uniforms than about winning battles. Other human spies learned similar things about the other alien species. The crystalline hegemony had amazing technology, but their leaders were slow to make decisions. They would argue for months about simple problems. The Vorthan Empire had huge armies, but their soldiers were not trained well. Dr. Han Yu-jin was in charge of the biggest project in human history. She was building a fleet of warships that would be stronger than anything the galaxy had ever seen. The ships would be fast and invisible and armed with weapons that could destroy anything. The main construction facility was hidden inside a cluster of asteroids that looked like natural space debris. From the outside it looked like nothing special, but inside it was a maze of factories and assembly lines and testing areas where the new ships were being built. Each ship was a masterpiece of human engineering. They combined the best alien technology with human improvements that made everything work better. The engines were twice as fast as anything aliens had built. The armor could stop weapons that would destroy planets. The ships also had something that no alien vessel possessed. They had human crews who could think and react faster than any alien. The new humans could process information and make decisions in seconds that would take alien crews minutes to figure out. The Shadow Council met in a secret room carved into the heart of the main asteroid. Admiral Bae Su-min was the military leader, and she wanted to attack the aliens immediately. Counselor Oh Ju-hoon was more careful and wanted to wait until the right moment. They had been watching the galaxy through their spy networks, and they could see that trouble was coming. The Zephyrian Empire was getting more aggressive and conquering smaller species. The crystalline hegemony was building battle stations to defend against Zephyrian attacks. Admiral Bae Su-min argued that humans should strike. While the aliens were distracted by their own problems, she had charts and battle plans that showed how the human fleet could defeat any alien force. Counselor Oh Ji-hoon worried that attacking too early would unite all the aliens against humanity. The debate went on for months while the human fleet continued to grow. Every day brought new ships and new weapons and new possibilities. The human children who had grown up in the asteroid cities were becoming adults, and they were eager to see the galaxy. Their parents had been forced to leave, but then something happened that changed everything. The Luminari were in trouble. The peaceful aliens who had tried to help humanity were being attacked by the Zephyrian Empire. The Zephyrians thought the Luminari were too weak to deserve to survive. The Luminari sent messages throughout the galaxy asking for help, but no one answered. The other alien species were too busy with their own problems or too scared of the Zephyrians to get involved. The Luminari were going to be destroyed, and no one cared. When the Shadow Council learned about this, they knew the time for waiting was over. The Luminari had been the only aliens who showed kindness to humans. They had voted against abandoning humanity, and they had helped human refugees escape when others would not. Admiral Bae Su-min stood up in the council chamber and announced that Operation Resurrection would begin immediately. The human fleet would leave the Void Sector and return to the galaxy not as refugees but as conquerors. The time for hiding in the darkness was over. Humanity was ready to remind the galaxy why they had been feared and respected. The aliens were about to learn that abandoning humanity had been the biggest mistake in their history. General Kang Se-ri stood in the center of the intelligence command room, surrounded by screens that showed information from all over the galaxy. She was a woman who never seemed to sleep and never forgot anything. Her eyes were sharp and focused. As she watched the data flow in from hundreds of human agents, the intelligence room was built deep inside the main asteroid, where the Shadow Council met. The walls were covered with displays that showed alien ship movements, political meetings, and economic data from every major civilization in the galaxy. General Kang Se-ri could see everything that was happening in real time. Her agents had been infiltrating alien society for decades. Some had surgery to look like different species, others used technology to disguise themselves. All of them were brave humans who risked their lives to gather information that could save humanity. Agent Kim Hin-woo worked as a trader on the crystalline hegemony capital world. He looked like a crystal being with his specially modified skin that reflected light in rainbow patterns. He had been living among the crystal aliens for 15 years, and they trusted him completely. Kim Hyunwoo sent reports about the crystalline military buildup. Were scared of the Zephyrian Empire and were building huge battle stations that could destroy entire fleets. The crystal aliens were usually peaceful, but they were preparing for a massive war. Agent Lee Soo-jin had infiltrated the Vorthan Empire. By pretending to be a refugee from a destroyed world, she worked in their military communications center and could intercept messages between Vorthan commanders. She learned that the Vorthan army was bigger than anyone knew. The Vorthan Empire had been secretly building weapons factories on hidden worlds. They had millions of soldiers in training and thousands of ships ready for battle. They were planning to attack both the Zephyrians and the Crystallines when the time was right. Captain Lim Jae-sung continued his work inside the Zephyrian military. He had been promoted to a high rank and now sat in on important strategy meetings. He listened to Zephyrian generals plan their conquests and learned about their secret weapons. The Zephyrians had developed new types of energy weapons that could crack planets in half. They had battle fleets that could move faster than anyone expected. They were confident that they could defeat any enemy in the galaxy, and they were probably right. But Captain Lim Jae-sung also discovered something important about Zephyrian weaknesses. They had become arrogant and lazy after decades of easy victories. They followed the same battle plans over and over. They never expected anyone to be smarter or more creative than them. General Kang Se-ri compiled all this information into reports that she shared with the Shadow Council. The galaxy was heading toward a three-way war that would be more destructive than anything in history. Billions of aliens would die, and entire civilizations would be destroyed. The human agents also gathered information about smaller alien species. Most of them were terrified of the coming war. They had no way to defend themselves against the major powers. Some were already being conquered or enslaved by the Zephyrians. Han Yu-jin received regular updates about alien technology through the spy networks. Her team studied every new weapon and defense system that the aliens developed. Then they figured out how to make human versions that were better. The human shipyards had been working non-stop for decades, building the fleet that would announce humanity's return. The ships were sleek and deadly, and unlike anything the galaxy had seen, each one was a masterpiece of engineering that combined speed, stealth, and firepower. The newest human ships could become completely invisible to any known sensor system. They could appear inside enemy formations without warning. They could fire weapons that move faster than light and hit targets from incredible distances. Admiral Bae Soo-min inspected the fleet regularly and was amazed by what human engineering had accomplished. The ships were beautiful in a deadly way, with smooth curves and surfaces that seemed to absorb light. They looked like predators built for hunting. The human crews were as impressive as their ships. The new enhanced humans could react faster than any alien species. They could process battle information and make decisions in microseconds. They worked together like parts of a single organism. Young humans who had grown up in the asteroid cities trained constantly for the day they would crew these ships. They learned to fly and fight and think faster than anyone in the galaxy. They were eager to prove that humanity deserved respect. The Shadow Council met regularly to discuss the intelligence reports and plan for the future. Counselor Oh Ji-hoon still preferred to wait and watch, but the evidence was clear that action would be needed soon. The alien powers were too focused on fighting each other to notice what was happening in the void sector. They had no idea that humanity had survived and grown stronger. They thought the empty region of space was exactly that empty. General Kang Se-ri showed the council members detailed maps of alien fleet movements and military preparations. The Zephyrians were massing ships for a major offensive. The Crystallines were building defensive positions. The Vorthans were moving armies into position, but then the situation changed in a way that forced the Shadow Council to act. The Zephyrians had decided that the Luminari were too weak to deserve survival. The peaceful light beings who had tried to help humanity were marked for extinction. The Luminari had no weapons and no way to defend themselves. They lived on beautiful worlds covered in crystal formations that captured and reflected light in amazing patterns. They spent their time creating art and music and poetry. The Zephyrian Empire saw the Luminari worlds as valuable real estate that was being wasted on a species that contributed nothing to galactic civilization. The Zephyrians wanted the crystal formations for their own purposes, and they did not care what happened to the Luminargent. Reports showed Zephyrian battle fleets moving toward Luminari space. The aliens who had been kind to humanity were about to be destroyed, and no one in the galaxy cared enough to help them. The other major powers were too busy preparing for their own conflicts to interfere. The smaller species were too weak to make a difference. The Galactic Council issued a statement expressing concern but took no action. General Kong Se-ri felt sick as she read the intelligence reports. The Luminari were sending desperate messages throughout the galaxy begging for help. They offered to share their art and knowledge and culture, but no one was interested. Admiral Bae Su-min stood up during a Shadow Council meeting and slammed her hand on the table. The sound echoed through the chamber as she spoke with passion and anger about the injustice of the situation. She reminded the council that the Luminari had been the only species to vote against abandoning humanity. They had provided medicine and supplies when others turned away. They had helped human refugees escape when the galaxy cast them out. Counselor Oh Ji-hoon understood the moral argument, but he worried about the practical consequences. If humanity revealed itself to save the Luminari, they would lose the advantage of surprise. The galaxy would unite against them. But General Kong Se-ri had an idea that could solve both problems. The human fleet could save the Luminari and at the same time announce humanity's return in a way that would terrify every alien civilization. Instead of revealing themselves quietly, the humans could decloak in the middle of a battle and destroy a major alien fleet. The galaxy would see that humanity had returned stronger and more dangerous than ever. The plan was risky, but it was also perfect. The Zephyrians would learn that their arrogance had consequences. The other aliens would see that humanity was not to be underestimated. The Luminari would be saved and would become humanity's first allies. Admiral Bae Su-min volunteered to lead the mission personally. She had been waiting 50 years for the chance to make the aliens pay for abandoning humanity. This would be the perfect opportunity. The Shadow Council voted unanimously to proceed with Operation Resurrection. The human fleet would leave the Void Sector and travel to Luminari space, where they would face the Zephyrian Empire in battle. Captain Kim Tae-ho was chosen to deliver the message that would announce humanity's return. He would broadcast on all frequencies in every known language. The words would be simple, but their meaning would change the galaxy forever. The time for hiding was over. The time for revenge had begun. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity had not forgotten how they had been treated, and that humans always repaid their debts. Captain Kim Tae-ho walked slowly across the metal floor of his ship. The metal made soft sounds under his boots as he moved toward the big window that showed space outside. His hands were shaking a little, but he tried to hide it from his crew. The stars looked the same as always, but everything else had changed. The Galactic Council building floated in space like a giant crystal. It was beautiful and scary at the same time. Kim Tae-ho had been here many times before, but today felt different. Today felt like the end of something important. The building was full of aliens from all over the galaxy, and most of them did not like humans anymore. Ambassador Park So-ra stood in the main hall of the council building. She was a small woman, but she had a strong voice that could make people listen. Her black hair was pulled back tight and her face looked tired. She had been fighting for humanity for months, but it was not working. The aliens were not listening anymore. The hall was huge, with walls made of some kind of stone that changed colors. The ceiling was so high that Kim Tae-ho could not see the top. Hundreds of different aliens sat in special chairs that fit their bodies. Some were tall and thin like trees, others were short and round like balls. Some had many eyes and others had no eyes at all. Park So-ra spoke into a device that made her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Her words were translated into dozens of alien languages. At the same time, she talked about how humans had always been good partners in trade and war. She reminded them about the times humans had helped other species when they were in trouble, but the aliens were not interested in listening anymore. The Zephyrian leader was the worst one. He was tall with blue skin and 4 arms. His eyes were red and angry when he looked at Park So-ra. He spoke in a voice that sounded like music, but the words were cruel. The Zephyrian said that humans were too dangerous to be part of the galaxy anymore. He said humans started too many fights and could not be trusted. He talked about human ships that had attacked alien traders even though those attacks had been self-defense. The other aliens nodded their heads and made sounds that meant they agreedly. Minho sat at his station on Kim Tae-ho's ship. He was the person who handled all the messages that came from other ships and planets. His job was usually boring, but today it was the most important job in the galaxy. He kept getting messages from Earth, and the human colonies, and all the news was bad. The plague had started small, just a few people getting sick in one city on Earth. But it spread fast, much faster than anyone thought it could. The doctors could not stop it, and the medicine did not work. Earth's hospitals were full, and then they started running out of space for all the sick people. Lee Min-ho read the messages out loud to Captain Kim Tae-ho. The cities on Earth were going dark one by one. New York had gone silent 3 days ago. London stopped sending messages yesterday. Even the big space stations around Earth were not answering when people tried to call them. The human colonies on Mars and Europa were in trouble too. They needed special machines and medicine from the alien species to keep their air clean and their food growing, but the aliens had already stopped sending supplies. The colonies had maybe 2 months before they would run out of everything they needed to survive. Captain Kim Tae-ho listened to all the bad news and felt sick in his stomach. He had family on Earth, and he did not know if they were still alive. He had not heard from his parents or his sister in over a week. The last message from his brother had been very short, just saying that things were getting worse back in the council building. The vote was about to happen. Park So-ra made one last try to change their minds. She talked about how humans and aliens had worked together for over 100 years. She reminded them about the wars where human soldiers had died to protect alien worlds. She showed them pictures of human children who had been born on alien worlds and grew up thinking of those places as home. She talked about the human scientists who had shared their discoveries with everyone and the human artists who had made beautiful things that aliens enjoyed, but it did not matter. The aliens had already decided. The vote was not even close. Almost every species voted to cut off all contact with humans. They would not trade with humans anymore. They would not help humans anymore. They would not even talk to humans anymore. Only one species voted differently. The Luminari were peaceful aliens who looked like they were made of light. They had always been kind to humans, and they did not want to abandon them now, but they were just one vote against hundreds. Their kindness could not save humanity. The Zephyrian leader announced the results with a smile in his voice. He said that all trade agreements with humans were canceled immediately. All military partnerships were ended. All human ships had to leave alien space within 10 days. Any human who did not leave would be arrested or worse. Park So-ra stood in the middle of the hall as the aliens started to leave. She looked small and alone, surrounded by empty chairs. Her life work had been to build bridges between humans and aliens. Now all those bridges were burning down, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. On his ship, Kim Tae-ho got a message from Admiral Song Hae-jin. She was the highest-ranking human military officer still alive, and she was giving orders to all human ships. The message was short, but it changed everything. Admiral Song Hae-jin told all human ships to go to the void sector immediately. This was a part of space that was empty and dark, with no planets or stars that anyone wanted. Most aliens thought it was useless space that was not worth exploring. She also told them to stop talking on the radio completely. No more messages between ships, no more calls to Earth, no more anything that other species could hear or track. This was called Operation Ghost Protocol, and it meant that humanity was going to disappear. Kim Tae-ho looked at his crew and saw fear in their eyes, but also determination. They were going to follow the orders, even though it meant leaving everything they knew behind. They were going to vanish into the empty space and hope that somehow they could survive. The human ship started moving toward the void sector like a sad parade of refugees. They left behind space stations that had been their homes for decades. They abandoned colonies that had taken years to build. They said goodbye to alien friends who could not help them anymore. As the human ships disappeared into the darkness, the galaxy started to forget about them. The trade routes changed to avoid human space. The history books started calling humans a failed species that could not survive in the modern galaxy. Most aliens thought humans were probably extinct within a few years. Some felt a little sad about it, but most just moved on with their lives. The galaxy was big and full of other species to trade with, and fight with humans had been loud and annoying. Anyway, the Galactic Council marked all human territory as forbidden, but not because they respected humans. They were just superstitious and thought human space might be cursed or dangerous. No one wanted to risk going there and catching the plague. That had killed humanity. Young aliens who grew up after this time never heard stories about humans. The older aliens slowly forgot what humans looked like, or how they acted. It was like humanity had never existed at all. The galaxy was peaceful and prosperous, and no one missed the troublesome species that had once demanded to be treated as equals. But in the dark, empty space of the void sector, something was happening. Something that the galaxy would not discover until it was too late. The humans were not dead, they were just getting ready. The Shadow Council chamber was carved deep in the heart of Base Omega, the largest asteroid in the human fleet. The walls were smooth black stone that reflected the light from the holographic displays. The air was cool and still, as the most important. Humans in the galaxy gathered for a meeting that would change everything. Counselor Shin Yun-young arrived first, as she always did. She was an older woman with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much suffering. She had been a young diplomat when humanity was forced to flee, and she remembered every detail of that terrible time. Admiral Bae Su-min entered the chamber wearing her crisp military uniform. Her boots clicked against the stone floor as she walked to her seat. She carried data tablets that contained information about the human fleet and its capabilities. General Kanseri came next, followed by the other council members who represented different parts of human society. Dr. Han Yu-jin spoke for the scientists and engineers. Commander Choi Woo-jin represented the asteroid cities. Captain Kim Tae-ho spoke for the military crews. The holographic displays showed the current situation in Luminary Space 3. Zephyrion battle fleets were moving toward the peaceful aliens' homeworld. The Luminari had sent desperate messages asking for help, but no one in the galaxy had responded. The first Luminari world had already been attacked. The beautiful crystal formations that covered its surface had been shattered by Zephyrion bombardment. The few survivors had escaped in small ships that were never designed for long space. Travel Counselor Shin Yun-young stood and spoke first. Her voice was steady, but everyone could hear the emotion underneath. She talked about the day 50 years ago when the Galactic Council had voted to abandon humanity. She reminded them that only one species had voted against that decision. The Luminari had stood up for humanity when everyone else turned away. They had provided medical supplies and safe passage to human refugees when others would not. The Luminari had paid a price for their kindness. The other alien species had treated them as outcasts for supporting humanity. The Luminari had been excluded from trade agreements and military alliances. Because they had shown compassion now, the Luminari were facing extinction, and the galaxy was ignoring their pleas for help, just as they had ignored humanity 50 years ago. The peaceful aliens who had tried to do the right thing were being punished for their kindness. Admiral Bae Su-min activated the tactical displays that showed the strength of the human fleet. 1,000 warships had been completed and were ready for battle. Each ship was more advanced than anything the galaxy had seen. Before the stealth destroyers could appear inside enemy formations without warning, they were fast and deadly and could disappear again before the enemy could react. The heavy cruisers had armor that could survive direct hits from planet-destroying weapons. The dreadnoughts were massive ships that carried enough firepower to destroy entire fleets. They were designed to fight multiple enemies at once and win. The carriers held squadrons of fighters that could outfly and outfight any alien pilot, but the most impressive ships were the new battleships that Dr. Han Yu-jin had designed. They were works of art that combined human creativity with alien technology. The weapons could fire projectiles that moved faster than most ships could dodge. Admiral Bae Su-min explained that the human fleet was ready for any challenge. The crews had trained for decades and were eager to prove themselves. The ships had been tested and improved until they were perfect. The human fleet was not just larger than any alien force, it was also more advanced. The aliens had grown comfortable with their old technology while humans had been innovating and improving everything. General Kanseri presented the intelligence reports that showed what was really happening. In the galaxy, the major powers were preparing for a massive war that would destroy billions of lives. The Zephyrian Empire was conquering smaller species and enslaving their populations. The crystalline hegemony was building battle stations that could crack moons, and half the Vorthan Empire was training armies that could overwhelm any defense after the Luminari were destroyed. The Zephyrians planned to attack the crystalline hegemony. The galaxy would be consumed by warfare, regardless of what humanity did. The only question was whether humans would act now or wait until it was too late. Commander Choi Woo-jin spoke about the human colonies that had been built in the Void sector. Millions of humans were living in the asteroid cities, and they deserved to return to the galaxy their ancestors had been forced to leave. The young humans who had grown up in hiding were stronger and smarter than their parents. They had been trained from birth to reclaim humanity's place among the stars. They were ready to fight for their right to exist. Arhan Yujin presented the technical analysis that showed human ships were superior to anything the aliens possessed. The weapons were more powerful, the defenses were stronger, the crews were faster and smarter. The human fleet had advantages that no alien force could match. The ships could become invisible to any sensor system. The weapons could punch through any known armor or shield. The crews could think and react faster than any enemy captain. Kim Tae-ho had been quiet during most of the meeting, but now he stood to speak. He had been the one to bring the last human refugees to the Void Sector 50 years ago. He had watched humanity almost die and then slowly recover. He talked about the promise that had been made to the children who grew up in the asteroid cities. They had been told that someday they would return to the galaxy and reclaim their birthright. That someday was now. The Luminari deserved to be saved because they had shown kindness to humanity when no one else would, but more importantly, humanity deserved to return to the galaxy because they had earned it through 50 years of hard work and sacrifice. The debate that followed was intense but not long. Everyone knew that the time for hiding was over. The galaxy had forgotten about humanity and thought they were extinct. The aliens were about to learn how wrong they were. Counselor Oh Ji-hoon had always preferred caution, but even he could see that waiting was no longer an option. The Zephyrians were getting stronger every day and would soon be too powerful to defeat. The vote was unanimous. Operation Resurrection would begin immediately. The human fleet would travel to Luminari space and reveal themselves to the galaxy. The time for silence was over. Admiral Bae Soo-min would command the first battle fleet that would engage the Zephyrians. Captain Kim Tae-ho would broadcast the message that announced humanity's return to the galaxy. The message would be simple, but its meaning would echo across every star system. Humanity had returned, and they were no longer the weak refugees who had been driven from their homes. General Kang Se-ri would coordinate the intelligence networks that would monitor alien reactions to the revelation. The galaxy would panic when they learned that humanity had survived and grown stronger. Dr. Han Yujin would continue improving the human ships and weapons. The war that was coming would require every advantage that human technology could provide. The Shadow Council members left the chamber knowing that they had just made the most important decision in human history. The galaxy was about to change forever, and humanity would be the ones changing it. In the shipyards and training facilities throughout the Void Sector, the news spread quickly. The human fleet was going to war. The children who had grown up in hiding were finally going home. The ships began moving toward the exit points that would take them back to the galaxy. The engines that had been silent for 50 years roared to life. The weapons that had never been tested in battle were powered up and ready. Captain Kim Tae-ho stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked out at the fleet that stretched as far as he could see. 1,000 ships filled with humans who were ready to fight for their future. The galaxy had abandoned humanity when they needed help most. Now humanity would return when the galaxy needed them least. The aliens were about to learn that some debts can never be forgiven. Admiral Zircon stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the last Luminari world through the main view screen. The planet was beautiful, with crystal formations that caught the light from its sun and threw rainbows across the continents. But beauty would not save it from Zephyrian conquest. The Zephyrian Third Fleet had arrived in Luminari space 3 days ago. 300 heavy cruisers and their support ships surrounded the peaceful planet like predators, circling wounded prey. Admiral Zircon felt proud of his overwhelming strength. The Luminari had tried to defend themselves with converted civilian ships that had mining lasers and industrial equipment attached to them. It was pathetic to watch. The peaceful aliens had no idea how to fight a real military force. Admiral Zircon had been a military commander for over a century. He had conquered dozens of worlds and defeated countless enemies. The Luminari would be the easiest victory of his career. They had no weapons, no strategy, and no hope. The Zephyrian ships were arranged in perfect formation around the planet. Each captain knew exactly what to do when the order came to begin the final bombardment. The planet would be reduced to rubble within hours. Lieutenant Commander Vextal monitored the sensor displays from his station. He was a young officer who had never seen real combat, but he was eager to prove himself. The destruction of the Luminari would be his first major battle. The sensors showed only the expected targets. The remaining Luminari ships were small and weak. The planet had no orbital defense platforms or military installations. This would be a one-sided massacre that would end quickly, but then something impossible happened. The sensor displays began showing new contacts. Ships were appearing from nowhere, materializing out of empty space like they had been invisible. The formations were precise and obviously military. Lieutenant Commander Vextal stared at his instruments in confusion. The new ships were unlike anything in the Zephyrian databases. The designs were sleek and deadly looking. The energy signatures were completely unknown. Admiral Zircon demanded an explanation from his tactical officers, but none of them could identify the mysterious vessels. The ships had appeared without warning in perfect battle formation. They moved with the precision of a trained military force. The unknown fleet was massive. Over 1,000 ships of various sizes had materialized around the Zephyrian forces. The smallest vessels were the size of Zephyrian destroyers. The largest were bigger than anything Admiral Zircon had ever seen then. The communication channels erupted with a message that was broadcast on every frequency in perfect Zephyrian language. The voice was calm and controlled, but carried an undertone of menace that made Admiral Zircon's blood run cold. Admiral Kim Tae-ho spoke from the bridge of his flagship Indomitable. His words were translated into dozens of languages simultaneously so that every alien in the galaxy could understand them. The message was simple, but its implications were staggering. He identified himself as an admiral of the Human Resurrection Fleet and demanded that the Zephyrian forces withdraw from Luminari space immediately. The tone left no room for negotiation or compromise. The galaxy erupted in chaos. Every monitoring station, every communication hub, every military command center received the same message: humanity had returned, and they had brought a fleet that dwarfed any single military force in known space. On the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Zircon felt a mixture of disbelief and rage. Humans were supposed to be extinct. They had disappeared 50 years ago and never been seen again. This had to be some kind of trick or deception. Admiral Zircon activated the fleet-wide communication system and spoke with the arrogance that had made him famous throughout the Zephyrian Empire. He declared that humans were extinct and that these imposters would be destroyed. The Zephyrian Third Fleet had never lost a battle. Admiral Zircon was confident that his superior numbers and advanced technology would quickly defeat these mysterious vessels. He ordered all ships to maintain course toward the Luminari homeworld. The Zephyrian fleet opened fire with their most powerful energy weapons. Beams of concentrated light and electricity lanced across space toward the human ships. The weapons were designed to vaporize anything they touched, but the human ships absorbed the attacks with shields that flickered and reformed like living things. The energy that should have destroyed them was deflected harmlessly into space. The alien weapons had no effect at all. Admiral Kim Tae-ho watched the Zephyrian attack with satisfaction. The human shields were based on technology that the aliens had never seen before. They could adapt to any weapon and become stronger with each hit. Then the human fleet returned fire with weapons that the galaxy had never encountered. Kinetic projectiles moving at incredible speeds punched through Zephyrian shields like they were made of paper. The projectiles were simple pieces of metal, but they moved so fast that they carried more energy than fusion bombs. When they hit Zephyrian ships, the results were catastrophic. Entire cruisers were torn apart in single hits. Admiral Zircon watched in horror as his proud fleet was systematically destroyed. The human weapons ignored shields and armor that had protected Zephyrian ships for centuries. The battle was more one-sided than anything he had ever seen. The Zephyrian ships tried to fight back, but their energy weapons were useless against human shields. Their tactics were predictable. and easily countered by human commanders who thought faster than any. Alien Lieutenant Commander Vextal abandoned his post and ran for the escape pods as his ship was torn apart around him. The bridge was filled with smoke and sparks as systems failed throughout the vessel. The battle lasted only minutes. The Zephyrian Third Fleet was reduced to scattered debris and escape pods floating in space. Admiral Zircon's flagship was disabled but not destroyed, a deliberate choice that would allow survivors to spread word of the battle. Admiral Kim Tae-ho allowed the escape pods to reach the nearest Zephyrian world. He wanted survivors to tell the story of what had happened. The galaxy needed to know that humanity had returned and that they were not to be underestimated. The human fleet had demonstrated their superiority without losing a single ship. The aliens had been shocked by the speed and efficiency of the human attack. The peaceful Luminari had been saved from extinction. As news of the battle spread throughout the galaxy, every major power began emergency military preparations. The humans had returned, and they were nothing like the species that had fled 50 years ago. The Galactic Council received reports from across civilized space. Human ships had been detected in dozens of star systems. The fleet was larger than anyone had imagined, and their technology was beyond anything the galaxy possessed on. The crystalline hegemony capital world military leaders studied the tactical reports from the battle. The human weapons were unlike anything they had encountered. The human ships moved with impossible speed and precision. The Vorthan Empire activated their most secret defense protocols and began moving their hidden fleets to defensive positions. The humans had announced their return with a victory that would be remembered for generations. Admiral Bae Su-min monitored the galaxy-wide panic from her command ship as the human fleet spread throughout former human territory. The aliens were scrambling to understand what had happened and how to respond. The smaller alien species that had been terrorized by the major powers suddenly had hope. The humans had returned as liberators who could stand up to the bullies that had oppressed them for decades. The Luminaries sent grateful messages to the human fleet, thanking them for the rescue and offering to share their knowledge and culture. The peaceful aliens had found powerful protectors who would not abandon them. Captain Kim Tae-ho prepared for the next phase of Operation Resurrection. The human fleet would return to the Galactic Council and demand recognition as equals. The galaxy would have to listen this time. The age of alien dominance was ending. The humans had returned from the darkness stronger and more determined than ever. The galaxy would never be the same. The Galactic Council chambers had never been so crowded or so frightened. Every representative from every major civilization in the galaxy had come to the emergency session. The air was thick with tension and the smell of fear from dozens of different species. The crystal walls that had once seemed beautiful and peaceful now felt like the inside of a cage. The alien delegates sat in their special chairs, but none of them felt safe anymore. The humans had returned and everything had changed. Admiral Kim Tae-ho walked through the main entrance of the chamber, wearing a crisp military uniform that showed his rank and authority. His footsteps echoed on the crystal floor as hundreds of alien eyes watched his every move. He was no longer the desperate refugee who had begged for help 50 years ago. He was the representative of a military force that had destroyed a major alien fleet without losing a single ship. The galaxy had seen what human weapons could do. The Zephyrian representative was a different person than the one who had voted to abandon humanity 50 years ago. The old leader had been killed in the battle over the Luminari homeworld. This new representative was missing 2 arms and spoke in a voice filled with pain. The Zephyrian delegate stood as best he could and spoke about the unfairness of the human attack. He claimed that the humans had violated galactic law by interfering in Zephyrian internal affairs. His words shook with rage and fear. Admiral Kim Tae-ho listened to the complaints without emotion. Then he activated a holographic display that showed the voting record from 50 years ago when the Galactic Council had abandoned humanity to die. He spoke in a calm, clear voice that carried throughout the chamber. He reminded the delegates that humanity had once been part of the galactic community. He talked about the trade agreements and military partnerships that had been broken. Admiral Kim Tae-ho explained that humans had not violated any laws because they had never agreed to follow alien rules after being cast out. The galaxy had declared humans extinct, so human actions could not be judged by galactic standards. The crystalline hegemony representative tried to interrupt, but Admiral Kim Tae-ho continued speaking, he listed the demands that humanity was making: full restoration of galactic citizenship, recognition of expanded territorial claims, reparations for the damages caused by 50 years of abandonment. The chamber erupted in angry voices from dozens of different species. The delegates shouted in languages that the translators could barely keep up with. Everyone was talking at once, and no one was listening. General Kang Se-ri stood beside Admiral Kim Tae-ho and activated another holographic display. This one showed the intelligence networks that humans had built throughout the galaxy over the past 50 years. The display revealed that human agents had infiltrated every major government, military organization, and corporation in the galaxy. They had been watching and learning and gathering information for decades. The alien delegates fell silent as they realized the implications. Human spies knew about secret weapons programs, hidden military bases, and political corruption that could destroy governments. The humans had been preparing for this moment. General Kang Se-ri spoke about the files that human intelligence had compiled on every major leader in the galaxy. She mentioned specific scandals and secret deals that made several delegates visibly uncomfortable. The Vorthan Empire representative tried to salvage the situation by suggesting a compromise. He proposed limited membership for humanity with restricted voting rights and monitored territory. Admiral Bae Su-min stepped forward and smiled coldly at the Vorthan delegate. She activated a massive holographic display that filled the entire chamber, showing the true size of the human fleet. The display revealed that the 1,000 ships that had destroyed the Zephyrian Third Fleet were just the beginning. Deep in the void sector, automated shipyards were producing new vessels at an incredible rate. Within 6 months, humanity would possess the largest, most advanced military force in galactic history. The ships being built were even more powerful than the ones that had shocked the galaxy at the Luminary battle. Admiral Bae Su-min explained that humanity no longer needed the galaxy's permission to exist. The human fleet was strong enough to take whatever they wanted by force. The only question was whether the aliens preferred war or peace. The Luminary representative spoke for the first time during the session. The being of pure light flickered as it expressed gratitude to humanity for saving their species from extinction. The Luminary pledged their complete support for human demands. Several smaller species that had been oppressed by the major powers began to speak in favor of humanity. They had seen what human weapons could do to bullies and tyrants. They wanted humanity as their protector. The crystalline hegemony delegate attempted to negotiate by offering trade agreements and cultural exchanges. But Admiral Kim Tae-ho rejected these proposals as insufficient. The time for half measures had passed. Commander Choi Woo-jin presented evidence of the crimes that various alien species had committed against humanity over the past 50 years, the abandoned colonies that had been looted, the human artifacts that had been stolen, the insults and mockery that had been directed at human memory. The chamber fell silent as the delegates realized that humanity remembered everything. The humans had not forgotten how they had been treated, and they had not forgiven the species that had abandoned them. Dr. Han Yujin spoke about the technological advances that humanity had achieved during their exile. The human ships were not just larger than alien fleets, they were generations ahead in terms of capability. The weapons that had destroyed the Zephyrian fleet were outdated compared to what the newest human ships carried. The armor and shields that had protected human vessels were primitive compared to current designs. The alien delegates began to understand that they were not negotiating with equals. They were being dictated to by a superior force that could destroy any of them at will. The balance of power had shifted permanently. Admiral Kim Tae-ho called for the vote that would determine the future of the galaxy. The motion was simple: full restoration of human citizenship with all rights and privileges, recognition of human territorial claims, payment of reparations for past damages. The Zephyrian delegate voted against the proposal, but his voice was weak and defeated. The other major powers hesitated, but they could see the human fleet displays that showed overwhelming military superiority. One by one, the alien delegates voted in favor of the human demands. The vote was unanimous except for the Zephyrians, who had been given a choice between acceptance and destruction. The Galactic Council had learned that abandoning humanity had been the greatest mistake in their history. The species they had thought were extinct had become the dominant power in the galaxy as the human fleet spread throughout galactic space, establishing new colonies and protecting allied species. The old order began to crumble. The age of alien dominance was over. The major powers that had once controlled the galaxy now lived in fear of human retribution. The smaller species that had been oppressed found new hope under human protection. The Luminari became humanity's closest allies, sharing their knowledge of art and culture in exchange for military protection. The peaceful beings had found guardians who would never abandon them. Captain Kim Tae-ho stood in the same chamber where humanity had been condemned 50 years ago. But now he was the one making demands. The galaxy had learned that humans always repaid their debts, both good and bad. The ghost ships that had emerged from the void sector had become the new rulers of the galaxy. The aliens who had thought humans were weak and primitive now knelt before human authority. The children who had grown up in the asteroid cities were now adults exploring the galaxy their parents had been forced to leave. They carried human technology and human values to every corner of civilized space. The galaxy would never again make the mistake of underestimating humanity. The species that had been abandoned to die had returned as conquerors who would reshape the universe according to their vision. Admiral Bae Soo-min watched from her flagship as human colonies were established on worlds that had been forbidden to them for decades. The fleet that had once hidden in darkness now patrolled the galaxy openly. The aliens had learned too late that humanity was not a species that could be easily discarded. The humans had returned from exile stronger and more determined than ever. The galaxy belonged to them. Now the age of human dominance had begun, and it would last for generations to come. The species that had been ghosted by the galaxy had rolled back in with 1,000 warships and remade the universe in their image.